Hi, this is Patrick. In this video I'm going to show you how to create the Netiquette project with Dreamweaver. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Dreamweaver and I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to create an HTML doc type HTML5 and I'm going to save it. I'm going to save it in my 502 folder. So one of the things with this project, and you can always look at the example and view the source code, it doesn't have to be quite like this, but we're going to use an external style sheet. And so one of the first things that I'll do if I know I'm going to use an external style sheet is I'll create that right away. With Dreamweaver, there's always multiple ways that you can do this. One way is you can use the Css Designer. So if I go over here and I click this plus sign, I can create a new CSS file, and then it wants me to browse to decide where I want to put that. And so I have a styles folder, maybe you called it CSS, but I'm going to call this netiquette.css and I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to hit OK. So I can see up here that it's added this, but I can also look over here to my styles folder and I should see not only my Netiquette HTML page, but I can see my CSS file. So let's say for some reason you have an issue, and some of the ways you can figure out if there's an issue, I'm going to go ahead and do a save all, is if I go over and I click on the Netiquette file, so even though this is giving me the main thing is this Netiquette HTML, which is the source code, I have this shortcut to that separate CSS file. And so if I'm getting any kind of error where I don't see this and I can't add text, for instance, in my CSS file, then there's something wrong. And so you can always start over. Some ways you can just go ahead and delete this link here, and in this case I can go over to Tools, CSS, and I can attach a style sheet. Now in this case it's upset with me, so I'm going to make sure my cursors, I'm going to repeat that steps once more. So I'm going to go to Tools, CSS, attach a style sheet. I'm going to browse for that style sheet that I had created that for whatever reason the link was not working. And so it's in my styles folder. I'm going to click on it and hit open and hit OK. And then just like that, my style sheet looks good. I'm going to make sure I save all. So now I'm going to make sure my cursor's within my body tag. Now I need to set up the basic structure. And so just like with the 502 project, I'm going to have a div with like ID equals container, and then I'm going to have the HTML5 structure tags, which you're going to do for almost any project in this course. You're going to have a header tag, a section tag, and a footer tag. And so once you kind of set this up, you could reuse this and save that code as a template if you wanted to. But in this case, I'm going to just go down to insert div, and I'm going to do the ID called container, hit OK, and then I'm going to hit return to delete that and add some space, and within that I'm going to add a header tag, hit OK. I'm going to add a section tag. I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to put my cursor outside of that, and I'm going to add the footer tag. And so you could do a save as and save this as, template, whatever would make sense if you wanted to, because this is going to be the basic kind of setup that you're going to use. I'm going to do the supply source formatting so you can see, but this is a standard way we're going to set up your pages in this course. Another thing you could always do, sometimes when I have a snippet of code I like, I might go to text edit or notepad on a PC, and I'm going to go to text edit, I'm going to go new, I'm going to make sure I'm in plain text view, and I might save this as a snippet of code that I want. So that's one kind of handy way. But with this, I'm going to look at this example some more. So I'm going to have within my header tag, I'm going to have a H1 title. Then I'm going to have this text with these kind of H2s, and then I'm going to have this callout box. And so I'm going to go ahead and start just adding some text. So I'm going to highlight this. So once I have this text, I'm going to go down to the property inspector, and if for some reason you don't see this, you can always go to window and you can make sure they have properties right there. But by doing this, it allows me to do some shortcuts down here where I can do an H1. Now you notice that that actually wanted to do everything as an H1. So this is where when I highlight text, I've got to be careful that it's highlighting it exactly the way I want. That looks more appropriate. And then there's a learner description. And so I might even go up here and just to help simplify things, put this in a paragraph tag. Then I'm going to add what is Netiquette. And maybe I'm going to, Netiquette is, right? So I'm going to actually copy this and speed this up, but I can go over here and I can highlight this, and this is going to be my H2. So generally, you want to go in order. It's kind of like an outline. You don't want to go from an H1 to an H3. If you have an H1, the next thing in line is an H2. And so I'm going to basically now just copy my text. And so for you, you might find, and when I'm copying text, I'll also use text edit to just copy and remove formatting. So I'll do things like that. But just to speed things up here, I'm just going to put all of this in down here. And I'm going to clean this up in just a minute. So for some of these, right, when I'm just going to bulk put things, I'm going to put it on here, and you notice that what Dreamweaver always wants to do is it wants to help you out, and it wants to basically put that closing tag for you. And so now it's all in kind of a paragraph tag, but if I put my cursor here, this is where I can kind of speed things up. And so once I have things kind of where I want, I'm just going to apply source formatting. I'm just going to double check my code before I go too much further. So I have this learner description up here, and depending on the site, learner description might not be important, but sometimes it's helpful to let people know what the point is or who the audience is. But it's all in a paragraph tag. That looks good. I have this what is Netiquette, which is really what I'm wanting my H2 to be. So I'd go to change that. This looks like it's in a paragraph tag. That looks good. I'm going to change this to an H2. I'm going to change this to an H2. And I'm going to change this to an H2. I'm going to keep going down. Sometimes it's also helpful to use over here this window where you can start getting an idea of the structure too. So there's lots of ways for you to double check how things go. For here, I know that this is going to be my footer, so I'm going to go down to HTML to character to copyright. And I'm going to type Patrick Lowenthal. And so the only other thing I don't have is my call out. And so in this case, you can see that I've used the aside tag. And I've done it right after my learner description. So this is where I can kind of go up, put my cursor right after learner description. I'm going to actually make sure it's outside of the paragraph tag. And I'm going to go to insert, and I'm going to do an aside tag. And so in this case, I'm not going to add a class, as this example I do, I believe. Let's take this side. Now actually the side I don't. I have the background on the H1, so I'm just going to hit OK. And I'm going to basically add my text for that call out. So call out's a really nice way to help draw attention to certain things. From magazines to you name it, people have used this as a way to draw attention to certain content. So I'm going to highlight this text. I'm going to change it to a paragraph tag, and I'm going to put my text in there. And then tips is actually a heading, and then so is the avoid web rage, I believe is the way I set this up. So I have tips as an H2, and in this case, the avoid web rage I have is an H2, but you could easily do that because it's a subheading as an H3. So we'll actually play with that right now. So I'm going to add some space here, add some space. I'm going to highlight that, and I'm going to make that an H2. You can see what that looks like. I'm going to then highlight this, and I'm going to make it an H3. Same thing here. And I haven't saved in a while, so I'm going to do a save all. And so this is where you can kind of see how the difference from HTML and CSS, because right now this is just my content. It's not styled. that's where I start to add these other things, but I can already see a typo here. And so this is where kind of that previewing can help you sometimes identify errors that you're making along the way. And sometimes you even might want to stop and spell check. So you'll notice here I have an ordered list and an unordered sublist here. So the ordered list is where you put your cursor right here in front of the think. And you can go down here and you can do this in the properties inspector, and you'll see that change that paragraph tag to OL, which means ordered list, and then a list item. And I can just then start doing this, and I think I have 4 weight and double, so I'm just doing this, and then the same thing over here. But I believe, like anything in Dreamweaver, there's lots of ways you can do it. You can do it over here too. And so this was discussion boards was the other main one. But in this case, there's also using these bullet list or an unordered list under it. And so let's make sure our cursor, you'll notice that it's not always exactly where you would expect it to be, your cursor. So use meaningless subject lines, void, add, and keep. And so always stop and look at kind of your code. You can see there's a typo again for me. And so you can see that. Now this is where you start running into problems where it wanted to fix that ordered list. So I'm going to actually take it here, and I'm going to double check the way this is set up, because I want an email. I'm going to get rid of that. And let's clean this formatting and see if it makes sense. All right, so now what we have is we have an closing or an opening tag for an ordered list, closing tag for it, and then we have the list item, and then under that we have an embedded unordered list. All right, so that makes sense. And so same thing here, we might take that and go like that. And then we have the same problem here. Discussion boards, it wanted to put that closing tag, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to add it. Now notice Dreamweaver tries to give you these little red warning signs if you have errors. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to I forgot to give a document title. So just like that, we have all our content. Now we just need to add some styles, but it's always nice to stop and preview. Okay, looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to still use the CSS Designer because I still want you to get comfortable with that, but I'm going to do some of this by hand code too, probably just to speed things up. And as these videos go on, you'll notice that I'll do a lot more hand coding. But I'm going to make sure that my Netiquette source, my CSS, is selected, and I'm going to go down to selector. And this is where I find it helpful if I have, for instance, my body tag, and then I hit selector, then it knows what I want. I'm going to simplify that. I'm going to come down here, and this is where I'm going to go to background color. And in my case, I know the color scheme I want. I'm going to do that, and that looks good. And you notice then there's this different color from my container. So I'm going to do container, and I'm going to hit plus. There's the container. Let's make sure it's selected. Let's go down to background color, and let's add that just like that. So then if I just even look at font, this is where in this example here, I can come over here in my body font, I'm using Gotham. I have it on the body tag. I could do this just on the container if I wanted to, but I'm just going to do it like this with body. I'm going to make sure Netiquette selected, body selected, and I'm going to hit type. We're going to go down to font family, and I'm going to use Gotham. And so often, I want to just have a simple type that I want to use. So typography, you can get all fancy, but often a real simple way is all you need to do. All right, so up here, if I look at this H1, I could do certain things here to make this bigger like this. One way would be just to add some, for instance, padding or margin to your H1. So the problem with that would be is if you use an H1 later on, you could run into ways where you have to simplify that, or you could be specific and say, I only want to do this to the H1 in my header. But in this case, I know it's the only H1 I'm having on my page, and so I'm going to hit return. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to make this smaller just so I can have more space to work with. Some people, if you pull this out more, you get this view, and so some people like this view because you can just kind of see it a little better. And so I can go down here and maybe padding top I want to do 15 pixels. Padding bottom I want to do 15 pixels. And I can see what that looks like, and it's like, yeah, it's not quite what I want as dramatic as there. So I'm going to try 25 and see what that looks like. You can see I already have an error there. And that's closer. It's still probably closer to 35. Okay, let's just go with that. It's probably not exactly. But then maybe left and right padding, I want to add something. Or because I want to really add this padding, this white space on everything, I might just do it from my container. So I'm going to select container that's already here, and I'm going to add 10 pixels. Now, keep in mind you can also do some shorthand up here where I can just say 10 pixels. And you notice that when I do that, and this is where you start going over and you start looking at your style sheet. I'm going to save all. So I'm going over here and I don't actually see my CSS for some reason on here. So this is good reason to check along the way. So in this case, I'm just going to close everything. It's saved, so I don't see the asterisk. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to open it again and I'm going to double check and it's there. So that's just like Dreamweaver being strange there and a glitch. So for instance, sometimes that would happen because you accidentally created two CSS files. In my case, I was pretty sure I did it right. So, but just closing, and you know, it's kind of the old adage, just restart your machine. It's kind of that same sad thing. So, but over here you can see I've added that to the container by just having that shorthand the way I did up there. It just added 10 pixels all the way around. Looks pretty good there. So a couple other things I'm going to do. I'm going to first focus on my H1 tag. And so I'm going to make sure I have Netiquette selected. I'm going to go to my H1 and I want to actually do the text, and I want to make sure I have this kind of, you can't see it, it's real subtle, but it's a type of blue. I'm going to go like that. And the other thing I'm going to do is, and you could do this on the H1 or really the header. And sometimes if you're not sure the difference of what it would look like, we're going to add this bottom border. So I go down here, I have the H1 selected, and this is where I can add this border down here, and I can add the color. I'm going to make it be the same color blue. And style, this is where almost always I do solid, and width I either do thin or I even say 1 pixel. And so I can look up here and I can see what it looks like, and it's a little bigger than I want, so that's where I might try to see what 1 pixel looks like. All right, you see how that made it a little thinner, a little more subtle, which was really what I was going for. So up here I have, if I go over here to code view, there's this paragraph here, and I really want to add some CSS to this, right? I want to make it this kind of red color to stand out. So there's a couple ways you kind of basically do this, but if I go down here, I can do this, and I can look down here and I can say apply a class, and I believe if I do that it will prompt me. This is where I just don't remember exactly the way it does stuff, and it's not wanting me to because the class hasn't been created yet. So we're going to first go over here, Netiquette. We're going to hit plus sign, and rather than this, we're going to hit learner, and we're going to start with this period, and then we're going to go over here to text. And so we're basically setting up this class first, then we got to apply it. So I'm going to try to get this red. Might not be exactly the way I'm going here, but so this is where I can check over here and see, okay, that's my learner. So now I'm going to highlight this, and now I should be able to select it down here, learner, and there it is. All right, so I had to first create it, but then I can use this down here. There are other ways where I could apply it, but that hopefully that makes sense what I just did. Now we're going to go down to this H2, and we're going to add some styles to it. We're going to make sure that's selected. We're going to hit plus, We're going to simplify that to H2, and then we're going to add some text. We're going to add the color. And so this is the same color blue, and when you do the picker, as I think I said in the last video, it doesn't always get it right. So sometimes you want to double check in your CSS to make sure that you're being consistent. For instance, this is the hex code 0D1F30. I want to make sure that that's being used other places. So what I'm going to do here is then go to my margin bottom. I'm going to give 0 pixels. And this is where I could say, you know, maybe I want a top as 10 pixels, and so I could play with this. By default, your headings have a certain amount of margin or space above and below them. As before, if you want to really improve that proximity, you have to actually do something to your paragraph tag. And so I'm going to hit paragraph, and I'm going to hit positive plus sign, and then I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to, for this, let's make sure it's selected right, I'm going to hit 0 pixels. And you see how that tightened it up. Now maybe you don't want it that tight. Maybe it's you want a little bit of something, and so you can play with that to see what's right. Much the same way you might sit there and look at your body and you might say, I want to add some line height. And so this is where sometimes you can just get used to adding some CSS up here, just hand coding. So this is where I can go over here and I can add a new line. You always got to be careful. And this color coding helps you know if you're doing it right. And so I'm going to do 1.5, and let's see how that looks. Okay, a little more than I wanted, so let's take that down to 1.3. Okay, it's getting closer. Maybe we'll see what a 2.5 or maybe 2 looks like. Okay, so I'm going to save all, and we're going to look at it. We still have a few more things to do before we wrap this up. We need to work on the callout box. We need to work on the footer. But you can start to see, especially if I pull this out a little and we compare it to this here, that we need a width on the container. Might make the H1 a little bigger. A width, we want to do a center that, and we want to work on that aside. So let's first do a couple of the things with the container. So we're going to click on container. We're going to do width. We'll just say 1,000. We'll use pixels, which is probably what I use more often than not, but you can use different measurements. And you could even use percent, which can make it adjustable, but when I do that, I tend to always use a max width, which I'll talk about later. We won't get into that in this assignment. So I'm going to do auto left and right with my margin. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if I go over here, and it actually put it in the wrong place because I wasn't paying attention. I want that under the container. And so that margin left and right auto, what it does is, and it actually, the width was in the wrong place too. So this is where one of the many reasons why I love to have code view open is because I have to keep checking what I'm doing. Because Dreamweaver is very finicky. Everything's got to be precise. So if you're not exactly where you think you are, it will put the CSS in the wrong place. And all of a sudden, it doesn't work the way that you think it should work. So I'm going to do a save all. I can always do this kind of live view if I wanted to. Let's just make this back. But for me, especially for something this big, that doesn't help. So that's where I go to preview. All right, and so it's definitely not showing up the way that I would think it would, but then just like that it did. So these things can, play around. So I mentioned before the H1, I might want it a little bigger. So I'm gonna gotta be careful where you click. I'm gonna go font size, and I'm gonna say 32 pixels. And let's see. Maybe I want a little more. 34. So looking a little better. So my last thing is before I do this side is I'm going to do the footer. So once again, make sure Netiquette, hit the plus sign. I like to clean this up a little, and then I go to text. And the two main things I like to do with footer's kind of like that small text in a commercial. You don't really want to see, it shouldn't be as big as everything else. So I will often center align. It's one of the only times I'll center align things, and then I will make it small. And sometimes I might change the font to make it even more subtle. Sometimes I will pop it outside of the container so it's even more subtle, if you will. So I'm going to do a save all, and now we're going to work on our aside. And the side gets a little more complicated. Not much, but so you can even see here, I used actually the paragraph font is a blue, so this blue that we're using, for instance, for our H1, this is where I could take this and I can copy that and go down to my paragraph tag, add that there, apply some formatting, and it adds that blue text if I wanted to. But we're going to focus now on this aside tag. So I'm going to have my cursor there, and I'm going to click on aside, and I'm going to make sure Netiquette, I'm going to hit plus, and clean that up a little, and I'm going to go down, and so with that selected, I'm going to just pull this up a little. We're going to make this a little smaller so we can kind of see. We're going to just work on our space here just a little. And you start now playing with the layout of this. So with aside here, we want to first do width. And so we're going to do pixels, and maybe we're going to try with 300 and see what that looks like. And so if you remember before, I did the whole thing as I think the width was 1,000, and so you could play with this, maybe 350, whatever, and you can start to see what it is. You don't want it obviously too big or too wide, but so we're gonna then go down. If I go to float, I can float that over like that, and you can see how it wrapped around it. But some of the other things we've talked about before, the importance of white space. Maybe it's 5 pixels here. Other things you want to do, you want to add a background color. You want to add a border, for instance. So let's go up to border. This is where I'm so used to doing some of this hand coding that it always throws me off trying to find where it is here. So I want to do border all the way around it. This is where maybe I just want to do thin. I want to do solid. I want to do that blue. And this is where, maybe that padding I'm not totally fine with 5 pixels, so I do 10. See what that looks like. That's looking pretty good. The border, I'm happy with that width. I might want to do something with this. So this is an H2, and so far I have this H2, but I want to do something different with this H2. And so this is where I could add a class, or if I click plus here, let's try this once more. For a selector, here it's very specific, so then I can actually do something different for this one. Right? So there's 2 ways that I could do this, having very specific selectors that, because I only want to do this for this one H1 within my aside tag, I'm only going to have one aside tag, or this is one of those things where I could add a class and that would work as well. And so I'm going to go to background, and there's 2 things I'm going to do here, right? So when I first use this background, I'm going to lose the text. So then I want to go to the text and I want to change that color. And then it also probably could use a little padding. And so this is an example where maybe 5 pixels is enough. And so there might be a need to, let's bring that up a little. So let's save this and take a look at what we got. Let's pull it out and compare it to at least the old one that I'd done a couple years ago. So we're just kind of comparing, contrasting. And so you can even see some of the colors aren't exactly the same, some of the fonts, some details, but you kind of get the gist of what I just did. There are other things you can always do to further tinker it. The last thing I would really do here before I upload it is I might first spell check. So I go to Tools, Spell Check, and you start going through and you start finding out, well, gosh, what did I spell wrong here? And even some like this, well, yeah, maybe I don't want Netiquette to be capital. So I'm going to add that to my personal, and I'm going to go back. It says I'm completed. Okay, so that's one thing. The next thing we're going to do a save all, and we're going to check now that it's valid. So we're going to go to valid, go to current. We're doing this in Dreamweaver. And so it's thrown me a couple errors here. So it doesn't like essentially that that I have this ordered list within this. So this is something, and let's even compare this one that's uploaded in C. And this is where always with valid code, you have to kind of make some decisions. You know, how important is it? You know, especially when you're learning, I think it's important for you to double check. And so you notice that Dreamweaver's throwing an error on this. It's actually not giving me an error when I go here. And so the other thing is I often will add a shortcut to this so I don't have to keep Googling it. Valid CSS. So we're going to check the CSS real quick. Looks good. So we're happy with that. I'm going to add a shortcut just so I have that in the future. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to upload this. So I like to go in this view, as I said before, and I'm going to go to my 502. So you obviously don't have this view that I do. And I don't know, I do have that old Netiquette, so I'm going to delete that in this case. Whereas in the previous video, I just created a new folder called 502A. In this case, I'm just going to use this exact one. I'm going to take it, I'm going to drag it over into my 502, hit yes. This is where I can double check. I saw down here, because the CSS is part of it, went ahead and uploaded that with it. And so then I can just come back here and I can double check and I can see what this new page looks like. Now sometimes, especially if your browser, the cache is showing the old version, you can always like go to incognito, double check what things look like there. The other thing you can do too, if you find that things aren't looking the way you expect, is that you can always double check. And I believe there's a way to do this. It used to be able to see just the dates right there. And now I don't see where it is, but there is a way where you can view the date. But if you find that, you know, it's still not behaving right, you're like, I don't know why that's not showing up, right? So you can sit there, connect, reconnect, and re-upload. And so I'm going to go over here, I'm going to upload that, and I'm good to go. So this is good. I'm going to disconnect, I'm going to save all, and just like that, we created the Netiquette project. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks.